Our next speaker can barely speak, but he's going to tell us a mystery story.
Well, I may be whispering my story. About a year and a half ago, I was approached by lawyers working for two tribes in the Olympic Peninsula, the Quileute and the Quinault. And they've been in court for the past 35 years trying to get back their treaty rights. When they signed the treaty in 1856, it ensured them the right of taking fish at all usual and accustomed grounds and stations. The trouble has been that their fishing rights were not being respected. So they were in court against the state of Washington and also the Makah tribe, their neighbors to the north. You can see on here the territories of the Quileute, the Hoh, the Queets, and the Quinault. And the Makah had come down from what is now known as British Columbia and had pushed the Quileute further south. And so there was essentially a battle to establish what was the normal and usual fishing locations of people at the time the treaties were signed. On this map here, you can see the bathymetry, and the locations on red are showing you the Indian midden sites. So there are a few European accounts that can be looked at to get some insights, but for the most part, the challenge is to try to interpret the middens, or they would just be in the garbage pits of where the remains of animals were put. So for us, we're asked to tell the court, so in the 1850s, what marine mammals were present. And of course, nobody was really collecting much data. There's a couple of naturalists did some wrote a few books, give us some insights, but they really want to know what was out in this 20 to 40 miles offshore. And so we can recognize that these are really highly productive areas. In fact, they're so productive, I think we can think of them as being the Serengeti of the ocean. There are herds of animals that are moving by, and I'll tell you a bit about that in a minute. We know there's 12 species of marine mammals that are occurring further than 20 miles offshore, and I think it's fair to assume that the behaviors of animals today is the same as animals as in the past. We know from the middens that all these species have got some remains found in them. But when you look at, okay, except the human diver. Yeah, I saw you there picking it out. But the remarkable thing is that, and there are first-hand accounts of fin whales being brought ashore that had been killed. But when you look at the bones that are in the middens, over 80% of them are from only one of these species. And it's from this one down here. They're from northern fur seals. And what's remarkable is that these northern fur seals, they don't come to shore. They only breed in 4 locations that we knew of in the 1850s. And to get them, they would have had to go offshore, 30 to 60 miles offshore to get them. So there I'm showing you where the two tribes that we were involved with were located. Here are the 4 breeding locations: the Pribilof Islands, Commander Islands, Robben Island, Krill Islands. The animals breed there, and we know the Pribilofs do migrate, and they migrate down off of California and go back up. So presumably the source of the bones was coming from the Pribilof Islands. We know a lot about the movements because after Alaska was purchased, a huge pelagic sealing industry was started, where boats were sailing out of Victoria in particular, taking native hunters with them to do the killing, to capture the seals and to get the furs. These 4 breeding sites, rookeries, well, not quite like this, but like this except for the catwalk, because you can't walk in among the animals. It's that dangerous, but the animals are very tolerant. You can be over top of them, but should you fall in, they will kill you. They're on really remote, foggy, wet, and dangerous spots. The dangerous part just being with them. The interesting thing is that none of these 4 sites ever had humans living on them. They are a pelagic species, and they never come ashore except in the summer to breed. The basic family structure, you have these bulls, which beef up from an average of 300 pounds to 450 in the breeding season. But when you compare to the females, they only weigh a mere 80 pounds, pups at 11. That means the dad is about 6 times bigger than mom. And it's always amazing when you ask kids this, can you imagine if your dad was 6 times bigger than your mom? And they kind of go, wow. But what we know from the history of the sealing, the pelagic sealing, is that only females were being taken. Many of those females were pregnant, but there were no bulls in amongst them. The bulls stayed further north from the Pribilofs. But here's the big mystery. When you look in the middens, it's got the skeletal remains of unweaned pups, juveniles, and bulls. And there were some historical documents that led to a belief that these seals had come from somewhere else, and possibly a local rookery, except that there's no record of them ever having bred on land in Washington. So out of that came a paper published by a group out of University of Victoria. And you see the title of it here is The Cape Flattery Fur Seal, an Extinct Species of Calorhinus. Sorry, commercial break. And so they had concluded, sorry, they had concluded that this had to be an extinct species, but they also drew some other conclusions, and they said, and the reason it wasn't seen on land is because it bred on beds of kelp, which of course for a biologist is just not possible, that seals need to have some sort of solid substrate, whether it's ice or rock, but they have to be out of the water to give birth or the pups will die. So this is what the courts were faced with, and I spent 2 days on the stand with really grueling cross-examination to come to terms with the fact of what I'm calling here a fairy tale was not possible, but I had to come up with a better explanation. So first off, when you look at the historic bones, there's a paper published that looked at the DNA. It came long after Susan and Becky's paper. And what they found is that based on the genetics, there's only one species of fur seal. The ancient seals are carbon copies of the modern seals. So they weren't a different species. And they suggested the Bering Sea was this refugia that allowed them to migrate and therefore be captured. But another piece of data that was really hard to come to grips with, and that was stable isotopes. These are essentially chemicals that are laid down in the bones, and they tell us something about what the animals ate and therefore where they were. And so here I'm showing you for nitrogen, and you'll see the blue line down below shows for the Pribilof population, it starts high because they're pups, and drops as they move from essentially eating mum, which is by drinking the milk, to moving down to eating fish, and then we see an adult signature coming back up again. So if those ancient ones were all from the Pribilofs, they should look like the blue, but you see in red that they had a very different signature. So let's just catch up to my story. The red ones are up here, and this just doesn't fit with them having come from the Pribilof Islands. It just doesn't make sense. So it does make sense when you see that where they're congruent is the pup stage and also out there at the adult stage, and suggests that maybe these animals were from a different population that we forgot about or wasn't known in the 1850s. So here we've got the 4 sites in 1850, and we've had a few things happen since then. A new colony was started in 1968 in San Miguel, another one up here in Bogoslav in 1980, and now a new one at the Fairlands in 1996. So now instead of having only 4 places in the world, we now have 7. Genetically, they are panmictic. They're all carbon copies of each other, but they're in really remote sites. So pay attention to the Fairlands, because what we didn't know at the time, but now know very well, is that there was a lot of sealing going on. Fur seals are being killed and traded in the late 1700s to 1800s. And the Russians also had a sealing station. So we did a lot of research looking at log books and historic records. And they did indeed have a sealing station, but by 1841, that population had been extirpated. There were no more fur seals there. Bringing some more modern data, these are from weaned fur seal pups that have been satellite tracked, and showing here these three colors: red is St. George, yellow St. Paul, and green Boguslav. You can see that those animals are coming out of the Bering Sea, going into the North Pacific, and these are young ones and not coming close to shore. But look at this magenta color. Those are from San Miguel. And we have other data also for now adult females. And so we clearly have two distinct foraging ranges from two distinct populations, although there is wandering too, like that one in magenta that took off north, thinking it was Alaskan. So here we have our current systems. And the Alaska current system and the California current system. And here in BC, we're at this transition zone. We tend to think a lot about Alaska and being part of that, but really part of two different systems. And it appears then that the fur seals that are born in California are retained within this California current system. And that would apply also to the bulls. And so this is then the explanation for these unique signatures and why the entire family was found within these middens. They came from a different population, with some adult females from Alaska being mixed in. And just very quickly here to wrap up, the only place to get these seals is offshore, and there are a few reports, first-hand accounts of having gone out. One person, his name is Morgan Roth, reported getting up early in the morning, sailing out because they had sails on their canoes, sail out and killing with spears fur seals out 30 miles offshore. I mean, it's remarkable. I know when I first started looking at this, I was quite skeptical about, I know I couldn't paddle out there. And then the more we read, the better we began to understand and appreciate the amazing navigation skills of the First Nations people. Just a few other quotes here. This is Hal George, born 1894, and he wrote that the seal hunters, or he was recorded saying seal hunters sometimes took off at 2 a.m. They wanted to get out to what was called Oxpasta, blue water, the place where the ocean really gets deep. Through this case, we got to work with linguistics experts, and there's an amazing number of words to describe the ocean and different parts of it, and color was one of the key ways to distinguish different places. Beatrice Black, born 1890, described, my brother used to go out as early as March, go out in the ocean, way out to get some seals. 2 or 3 months he'd go out. They risked their lives going way out, 40 miles out in the ocean in an open canoe, 3 men in a canoe. Sometimes they'd be loaded with about 5, 6, or 10 seals. And this is Chris Morganroth, who I referred to earlier. Seal hunting by coastal Indians takes place during these 2 months, April and May, in the 100-mile stretch of open ocean between the mouth of the Creeks River and Cape Flattery. Here, the seals approach nearest to land, the line of northerly migration being about 30 to 50 miles offshore. When out far in ocean, another quote this was from Arthur Howittle, when out far in ocean and unable to make shore, canoes were anchored thus. The sails were laid flat on the water, stones were tied to them on each end, and canoe made fast to the sails and stones by means of a rope. What fits so well with the biology also is, so we've got these sealing implements, and some of these are in museums, others just from drawings at the time, the spears that were used. A few photographs also from this time showing how it was done. A seal club, and of course they could spear them, and they were going out, so in the morning, the seals that had fed all night, because they had to wait for the fish to come up to the surface, would be sleeping, and then they could be speared and brought on and clubbed. And so, conclusions then, and this is some of the seals are brought back to shore, and they're all fur seals, you can see that really clearly. And so it appeared then these Farallon and Pribilof Islands were refugia for northern fur seals. Humans never found these islands, and they provided regular and dependable food and furs. And here's a bit of speculation at the end. I suspect that the fur seals, it may well have happened in British Columbia, where the continental shelf is really narrow and comes in. The people first encountered the fur seals. And this technology and knowledge, they were out there in the blue water, in that Serengeti, was passed down to tribes up and down the coast. And so I suspect the fur seals may well have been responsible for the development of these incredible seafaring abilities. Thank you very much. Boy, that was tough.
Any questions for Andrew? Okay.
Oh, and I should just add, and they won their case. And they couldn't believe it after 35 years fighting it that they won it. And a lot came down to the evidence about marine mammals.